Like a hunter stalks its prey, David Carpenter would stalk his victims as they walked through the state parks near San Francisco, California. He would gain a vantage point and wait for the perfect time to charge. In his lightning-fast attacks, he would leave no time for the victims to defend themselves. After a fourth body was discovered in the park, investigators were able to conclude that the bullets recovered from the crime scenes were all from the same gun. They now knew that they were chasing a serial killer. Hello everybody, my name is Josh. In today's true crime story, we're going to be discussing David Carpenter, the Trailside Serial Killer, in 10 minutes or less. So we are going to have to talk really fast for this one. Let's start the timer for 10 minutes here. Born in 1930 in San Francisco, California, David Carpenter had several serial killer traits. He had an alcoholic and abusive father. His mother was very domineering and also abusive. She basically wanted to control his whole life for him. She actually even put him in ballet and dance classes when he was younger, even though he didn't want to, and a ton of kids in school made fun of him for that. He was also constantly told by his mother and father that he was worthless. David developed resentment towards his mother at a very young age. He was a bedwetter and he also tortured animals. In 1947, at the age of 17, David Carpenter was arrested for molesting two of his cousins. He spent 1 year in jail and was released. David got married at the age of 25, had 3 kids, but wasn't able to hold a steady job. David started stalking women at the age of 30. He actually lured one woman out into the woods where he tied her up with a clothesline, beat her with a claw hammer, stabbed her in the hand. It wasn't until she screamed loud enough that a police officer heard, ran over. David Carpenter actually pulled out a gun, started shooting at the officer. Obviously, the officer returned fire. He actually did shoot David once and was able to apprehend him. David survived the injuries and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. After David's 14-year sentence, his wife, rightfully so, filed for divorce and took the kids as far away as she could. In prison, a psychiatrist evaluated David Carpenter, found out that he had sociopathic tendencies and had an above average IQ of 125. David was released from prison after 9 years, quickly got remarried to another woman, and just as quickly got divorced from that same woman. In 1970, at the age of 40, David Carpenter broke into a woman's house. He kidnapped her, raped her, and stole her vehicle. He was captured shortly after the incident and spent another 7 years in prison. He was released in 1977, and at that time, police thought that he actually could be the Zodiac serial killer. So they actually did a full investigation on him and came to the conclusion that he didn't have anything to do with the Zodiac killings. What investigators didn't know was that David Carpenter was about to go on his own killing spree and lead the investigators into a wild goose chase. In 1979, David was seen at a local bank talking to a teller. The teller's name was Ann Menevar. One of the customers of the bank actually spoke to Ann and said, "Hey, watch out for this guy. He's a dangerous person." A few days later, Ann Menevar went missing. Her body was not found until June 16th of 1981, which was after David Carpenter was arrested for the last time. Her body was found near Mount Tamalpais by a few hikers. It is believed that after David talked to her at the bank, he stalked her for a couple days, was able to kidnap her, most likely raped her, killed her, then threw her body out in the mountainside. The next 3 murders also take place near Mount Tamalpais, near San Francisco. In August of 1979, Ida Kane went missing. Her body was later found by a couple hikers with a gunshot wound to the back of her head and in a kneeling position. In March of 1980, Barbara Schwartz was found in the same area. Instead of a gunshot wound, she had multiple stab wounds, but was posed in the same position. She was out for a jog that day. Ann Alderson was murdered in October. She was out for a jog when David Carpenter kidnapped her, shot her in the back of the head, and dumped her body after posing it in the same position. Police were having an extremely hard time trying to find any evidence in the areas of all these murders. They were able to find a couple shoe prints, which they made casts of, and they were also able to find a couple bullet casings, but that's it. With all of these bodies turning up in the same area, police knew that the killer would strike again. So they actually made a plan that as soon as a call came in that another body was found, they were going to shut down every entrance and exit to that park and make sure that they screened everyone before leaving. Unfortunately for police, the next murder didn't actually happen in the same park. David Carpenter was changing up his tactics. On November 27th, 1980, Shauna May disappeared from Point Reyes Park, about 15 miles north of where the original victims went missing. 2 days later, on November 29th, Shauna's body was found. She had a bullet wound to the back of her head. What the police did not expect was was a second body that was posed right next to Shauna. It was the body of Diane O'Connell, who went missing about a month earlier. Diane had the same gunshot wound to the back of her head and was posed directly next to Shauna's body. As police and investigators were searching the area, they found 2 more bodies. Cynthia Moreland and Richard Towers were both found in the general vicinity of the other 2 bodies. Both victims had vanished in October around the same time as Ann Alderson. Police and investigators discovered 4 bodies in the same day at that park. This led to widespread panic in that community. Police knew that they had a serial killer on their hands, but had very little evidence to go on until March of 1981. In March of 1981, Ellen Hansen and Henry Cowell were out for a hike in their local park near Santa Cruz, California. What they didn't know was David Carpenter had been stalking them through the park for the last hour or so. David would use high vantage points to look down on the hikers and plot out where he was going to attack. After David felt comfortable with where he was going to attack, he waited for the right moment. He jumped out of some trees and some tall grass and ambushed them with a gun. He then announced to Ellen and Henry that all he wanted to do was rape Ellen. Obviously, Henry and Ellen were in a state of shock, so they decided to try to make a run for it. David Carpenter shot Ellen as she was trying to run. He also took a few shots at Henry, which ended up hitting him through the neck. However, it did not kill Henry. Henry actually was able to crawl out of there and run to get help. A few other hikers were close by and ended up calling 911 when they heard the gunshots. These hikers were also able to help Henry as he had a major gunshot wound to his neck. Henry survived the encounter with Carpenter and was able to give police a description of what Carpenter looked like. Other hikers in the area were able to identify Carpenter's vehicle as a red late model foreign car. On May 1st, 1981, a resident from San Jose, California called the police to tell them that his girlfriend Heather Skaggs was missing. She was last seen headed out to buy a vehicle from a coworker named David Carpenter. David Carpenter made it a special point to tell Heather Skaggs to come alone when she was going to come pick up the car. Public service announcement to anyone listening: do not go alone, or do not go at all when someone says, hey, make sure to come alone. That is a huge red flag. Don't do it. Police went to Carpenter's house to investigate when they realized that David Carpenter had a very big resemblance to the police sketch that Henry just gave from his recollection. Police also noticed that the car in the driveway was a red late model foreign car that was also given in the description by the other hikers when Henry was attacked. Police did a background check on David Carpenter and found out his very violent history, so they actually took him down to the police station to interrogate him that day. 10 days later, Heather Skaggs' body was found in the Beg Basin Redwood Park. This park was just north of San Francisco in the general area of all the other killings. There was a .38 caliber gun recovered in David Carpenter's belongings. This gun was matched to killing Heather Skaggs and 2 other victims. Police were able to gather enough evidence to charge David Carpenter with 5 counts of murder, 2 counts of rape, and 1 count of attempted rape. The jury found him guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death and is still incarcerated in San Quentin prison right now. That is my story of David Carpenter, the Trailside Serial Killer. I hope you liked it. Have a great day, everyone.